Hello, I'm Rebecca Robertson, President and Executive Producer of Park Avenue Armory. Welcome to our third and final event of the 2022 Malkin Lecture Series. Tonight we are delighted to welcome two curators who will speak about the design of one of the Armory's most charming company rooms, Company K, which was decorated in the Queen Anne style by Kimbel and Cabus, working with architect Sidney Stratton, a partner at McKim, Mead & White. One of the most special characteristics of the 7th Regiment Armory is the number of exceptional artists and designers who worked on its interiors, including Louis Comfort Tiffany, Stanford White, and the Herder brothers. Another of those prominent design firms was Kimbel and Cabus, which was the subject of a recent major exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum. We are fortunate to have with us tonight the curators of that exhibit, Barbara Veith and Medill Harvey. Barbara Veith is a guest curator at the Brooklyn Museum. She previously taught in the Cooper Hewitt Parsons Master's Program in the History of Design and was a research associate for the American wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Medill Harvey is the Ruth Bigelow Winston Associate Curator of American Decorative Arts and manager of the Henry R. Luce Center at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her most recent publication is Collecting Inspiration, Edward C. Moore at Tiffany & Company. I hope you enjoyed tonight's program.
Good evening. Thank you, Kirsten, for the kind introduction. Medill and I are honored to speak to you tonight and to share our exciting discoveries made while working together on the exhibition and publication, Modern Gothic, the Inventive Furniture of Kimbel Cabus, which was on view earlier this year at the Brooklyn Museum. This was the first museum exhibition to trace the timeless immigrant success story of German-born Anton Kimbel and French-born Joseph Cabus. Over the course of their nearly 20-year partnership, the two men developed one of New York City's leading furniture and decorating firms of the post-Civil War era. Excuse me. They captured national and even international attention for their fresh take on the forward-looking modern Gothic style. The late Dr. Barry Harwood, seen here to my left and right, assembled Brooklyn's preeminent institutional collection of the firm's work for a long-anticipated study, and our work pays tribute to his legacy. We especially thank Dee Dee and Barry Wigmore for their generosity and their vital support of this undertaking. And I now turn it over to Medill, who will be speaking to you about these two men and their remarkable partnership.
Thank you, Barbara. I'll get this down for shorter people. The story of Anton Kimbel and Joseph Cabus is at once commonplace and exceptional. Immigrant craftsmen and artists coming to the United States, bringing traditions and skills from Europe and shaping American art and industry defines much of the 19th century history of America. Kimbel and Cabus were two among many immigrant craftsmen who worked in New York City, which by the mid-19th century had become the leading artistic and commercial center in the United States. What makes them exceptional is the success they found and the impact they had on taste and domestic furnishings. When I first embarked on researching these dynamic craftsmen, relatively little was known about these men and their partnership. As a graduate student, I was charged by the then curator of 19th century furniture at the Met, Catherine Vorsanger, with sorting out their biographies and firm history. She was contemplating an exhibition on cabinet making in New York City in the 19th century, and her friend and colleague at the Brooklyn Museum, Barry Harwood, was hoping to produce a monographic exhibition on Kimbel and Cabus. Although far more years than I care to admit have passed since then, this project happily fulfilled that vision. Anton Kimbel, pictured in the upper left, was born in 1822 in Mainz, Rhineland-Palatinate, now Germany. His father, Wilhelm, was a prosperous cabinet maker, and his maternal uncle and godfather, Anton Bembe, directed a successful furniture making and upholstery business. Young Anton grew up an apprentice with both his father and uncle. From an early age, he displayed notable talent, inspiring his uncle, to finance his education and help him secure positions with renowned cabinet-making firms across Europe, including Pallenberg in Cologne, Alexandre Georges Fourdenoy in Paris, and Nurkin in St. Petersburg. At the age of 26, Anton boarded a ship and headed to New York City. Likely facilitated by introductions from his uncle, Kimbel found employment as a designer at one of the leading New York cabinet makers, Charles A. Baudouin. The Baudouin firm was a large establishment, and its showrooms were described as one of the city's greatest attractions. Baudouin was making furniture in a host of fashionable European styles, such as Rococo Revival and Renaissance Revival, and also offered interior decorating services, all of which would have been entirely familiar to Kimbel, given his uncle's firm operated in very much the same way. This chair is an example of the furniture produced by Baudouin's shop during the years between 1848 and 1854, when Kimbel served as a designer there. An article published in 1876 in a periodical American Cabinet Maker identified Kimbel as one of, quote, only 4 designers of any note in all Manhattan Island, end quote, at the time of the 1853 New York Crystal Palace exhibition. And it went on to say that Kimbel, and again I quote, contributed a dignity to chisel, gouge, and saw that has resulted in the permanent establishment of household art in America. So Kimbel successfully leveraged his skills as an artisan and designer and his broad knowledge of European cabinet-making traditions and current fashions to establish himself as a successful member of New York City's cabinet-making community. In February of 1854, a few months before Baudouin closed his shop, Kimbel set up a furniture and upholstery business in partnership with his uncle, who provided the capital while remaining in Europe. The partnership of Bembe and Kimbel touted their European connections and offered furniture in all of the latest European styles. Here I'm showing you an image of a parlor designed by Kimbel that was published in Gleason's Pictorial Drawing Room Companion in November of 1854. The furnishings display the refined, curvilinear profiles of the French Rococo Revival style. Interestingly, the accompanying text credits Kimbel with developing quote-unquote unique styles that, quote, appear to be American modifications of those now in vogue abroad. Bembe and Kimbel enjoyed considerable success moving uptown to a location at 928 Broadway in the heart of the fashionable Ladies' Mile shopping district, where they remained from 1857 until 1862. After more than 12 years of prosperity, Kimbel experienced a dramatic reversal of fortune, occasioned by the death of his uncle in March of 1861. His cousin and silent partner demanded immediate repayment of his father's investment, which required the sale of the firm's stock and Kimbel's own house. Not long thereafter, Kimbel's wife died of typhoid. He had to send his 5 children to Germany to live with their grandparents, and he too almost died of typhoid. Amazingly, Kimbel managed to reestablish himself, first working as a draftsman for a former competitor, and then, with monies provided by a friend, he opened a new cabinet-making partnership with a furniture maker who had been his neighbor on Broadway, Joseph Cabus. Far less is known about Cabus's life and training. Barbara and I have pieced together his story through documents such as this 1850 census record. Born in Calmoutier, France, Cabus came to New York City in 1833 with his family when he was 8 years old. His father, Claude, is listed in city directories as a cabinet maker, and we presume Cabus learned his skills from his father. Industrial census records indicate Cabus worked for the renowned French-born cabinet maker Alexander Roux. He eventually became Roux's foreman, assuming responsibility for overseeing the firm's production of fine furniture in a range of fashionable European styles. This cabinet exemplifies the exceptional carving that distinguished furniture made by Roux. A period account written by another cabinet maker, Ernst Hagen, describes Roux as, quote, the next best to Baudouin. Although he found Roux's style, and again I'm quoting, rather better than Baudouin's. Which firm was superior is immaterial, but the fact that Kimbel and Cabus held prominent positions at leading New York City cabinet-making establishments attest to their skills and versatility. Cabus and Roux parted ways in 1860. Many cabinet-making firms really ceased operations during the Civil War, and Cabus served as a member of the 55th New York Volunteer Infantry, the Garde de Lafayette. By 1862, however, he had set up an independent furniture-making business at 924 Broadway, right next door to Bembe and Kimbel. We can only imagine the conversations that led to Kimbel and Cabus joining forces. As seasoned professionals in the New York City cabinet-making trade and neighbors, they undoubtedly were acquainted and had much in common. Their partnership began in 1863 and lasted until 1882. During those years, they pioneered an inventive take on the modern Gothic style, creating furniture that attracted a wealth of eager clients, inspired imitators, and secured their position as leading arbiters of progressive taste and artistic interiors. Initially, Kimbel and Cabus was a small wholesale operation supplying furniture to other retailers. The business steadily grew, and within 4 years, they had become a sizable concern that advertised as cabinet makers and decorators. No documented work is known from the early years, but other records give us a sense of the range of the furnishings they were producing. Subsequent to mounting the exhibition, a collector shared images with Barbara and me of a classical cabinet bearing a label we'd never seen. And it's illustrated here at upper right. I know it's hard to see, but it was very exciting for us in that it lists their first address and indicates where each of them had worked formerly, evidence that they were a fledgling concern. The advertisement at left documents their strategy to attract a broad range of customers by offering wares at varied price points. And you'll note the language at the bottom, at prices within the reach of all. In 1873, they relocated to 7 and 9 East 20th Street, which their advertisements pointed out was opposite the fashionable retail establishment Lord & Taylor. Kimbel and Cabus were savvy businessmen who understood the importance of associating themselves with progress, prosperity, and fashionability. Kimbel and Cabus produced furniture in the late phase French classical revival or neo-Grec style as seen here. However, by around 1873, they had fully embraced the modern Gothic style. Not only were both men well-versed in all of the latest fashions and the British furniture designs of such proponents of the Reform or Modern Gothic as Bruce Talbert, whose Pericles sideboard is pictured here, but Kimbel's early career and training exposed him to continental European approaches to the neo-Gothic style as well. The firm's trade card evidences a striking affinity with Talbert's work and asserts Kimbel and Cabus's commitment to identifying themselves as synonymous with modern Gothic taste and furnishings. Kimbel was undoubtedly familiar with the work of German architect Conrad Wilhelm Haase, founder of the Hanover School of Architecture, and Haase's student, Edwin Oppler. And on the screen now is a chair design Oppler created for Marienburg Castle in Schulenburg, which he published in a design journal he edited, Die Kunst im Gewerbe, which translates to industrial art. Crediting the architect George Ungeweiter, you'll note the distinctive angle of the hind legs, which can be found in a number of Kimbel and Cabus's own designs. In April of 1876, the critic Harriet Prescott Spofford illustrated a version of this Kimbel and Cabus side chair in her Harper's Bazaar article entitled The Gothic Style. Kimbel and Cabus's furniture had become exemplars of the progressive modern Gothic taste, and this chair found an enthusiastic audience. The co-founder and first president of Cornell University, Andrew D. White, was among those who appreciated this design, as 3 of these chairs appear in a photograph of his reception room shown here. The letter on the left is one Kimbel wrote to White asking for an introduction to the publisher Appleton so that Kimbel could discuss and promote his firm's work. As Kimbel and Cabus enjoyed favorable press and patronage from notable and well-connected patrons, they astutely leveraged their connections to burnish their reputation and increase their renown. The table at the center of White's reception room is another example of Kimbel and Cabus furniture, and it's here revealing a take on the Gothic style that's indebted to vernacular German furniture. North American critic Clarence Cook illustrates a table and chair from Tyrol, Bavaria in his publication, The House Beautiful, which I'm showing you here. And the accompanying text reads, "A few years ago, Messrs. Kimbel and Cabus made several tables after a design similar to this, but they were decorated with carving rather than painting, and this made them more costly. I remember, however, that they were very pretty and seemed all the prettier for breaking up the monotony of the New York furniture shops with something altogether new on this side of the water." Well, Kimbel and Cabus had secured a reputation as a fashionable, innovative, and important cabinet-making concern in advance of the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial. Their display at the fair, which is pictured here in an image that was widely published and reproduced during and subsequent to the fair, proved to be a watershed event for the firm. The accolades and laudatory press they received brought them to the attention of not only the millions of visitors to the fair, but also to audiences throughout the United States and beyond. This illustration from Harper's Weekly captures more fully the density and rich variety of furniture forms displayed in Kimbel and Cabus's exhibit. Where the drawing conveyed a more spare, reductive aesthetic, this illustration offers a more accurate and lively representation, complete with rendering of fair visitors admiring the display. A photograph Barbara discovered during our research confirms that the Harper's illustration is indeed a remarkably accurate depiction of the artful and trend-setting display. Here you see both the photograph and two of the furniture forms that were featured in the display. I'm now going to turn it over to Barbara to discuss a recent discovery regarding work by Kimbel and Cabus on display at the Centennial and a little more of their story, and then we will sit down and chat.
So, the exciting discovery of this printed image expands our understanding of Kimbel and Cabus's contributions to the Centennial exhibition. So in addition to the award-winning display, the firm designed and executed a, quote, handsome, substantial, and most artistically beautiful ash bookcase for the American Bible Society. And this bookcase measured 12 feet high by 18 feet wide by 3 feet deep. So this is a massive object. It was prominently situated on axis at the center of the American Book Trade Association structure, and the case attracted visitors to the Society's display of historic Bibles. Images of the bookcase were reproduced in a Bible Society pamphlet that was circulated at the Centennial, as well as in Publishers Weekly. And all of this attests to the visual impact of Kimbel and Cabus's craftsmanship. Because there are few labeled examples of Kimbel and Cabus's furniture, primary sources from design drawings to printed images seen here and photographs are vital tools that aid in the identification and the attribution of the firm's work. So here we see a fantastic depiction of Kimbel and Cabus's showroom at 7 and 9 East 20th Street in 1877. And this image documents the many large and small designs ranging from case pieces and chairs to hanging wall cabinets and even humidors that the firm was making at that time. A remarkable surviving album of photographs, from which one example can be seen on the right, is in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum's library here in New York, and functions as a touchstone of sorts for identifying Kimbel and Cabus's work. The album was given to the museum in 1948 by Anton Kimbel's granddaughter, Lillian, and it documents the variety of forms and decorative details that the firm produced around 1875. So by this time, during the 1870s, catalogs and sales portfolios were increasingly recognized as valuable marketing tools to share work with potential customers. Kimbel and Cabus were among the first commercial designers to use photography to sell furniture, and the album includes more than 100 designs. The largest number of photographs depict case pieces, such as this magnificent cabinet that you see on the right, an example of which is in the Baltimore Museum of Art collection, you've seen on the left. And an interesting detail is if you look to the bottom of the period photograph on the right, you'll see an ink signature, A. Kimbel and Joseph J. Cabus, which is a sure indicator of their proprietary interest in the image. The second largest group of photographs in the album depicts seating furniture, such as a robust armchair on the left that features roaring lions' masks at the end of the arms and bold quatrefoils on the sides, and the related side chair that you see to the right. Thanks to collector Andrew Van Stein, we displayed a splendid version, which you can see right there in the vignette, which was part of our exhibition. The remainder of the photographs depict numerous small forms, including hanging cabinets, easels and pedestals, tables, revolving book and music stands, and fire screens, such as the example seen here on the right. Each object is annotated with handwritten ink numerals, which are most likely production numbers, and some of the photographs feature graphite notations in the margins that indicate dimensions and even suggest that prices varied according to finish or treatment, offering very exciting evidence of the firm's practices. So, for example, I'm going to ask you to squint with me. Might be a little bit cut off here, but if we take a look at this photograph, you can see number 300. So this desk is form 300. The fire screen is form 295, and they're delicate graphite notations, not easily visible in this photograph above, that indicate that the desk came in two different versions, one for $65 and one for $75. And we can also make out that in the center of the photograph, the image has been stamped 2 times with the Kimbel and Cabus name and address in ink, more offering further evidence of their protective or proprietary interest in these images. When the photographs are examined in numerical order, it suggests which forms came earlier and which forms came later. So, for example, this monumental Neo-Grec cabinet that Medill was speaking about a few moments ago is number 4, which aligns with being an earlier style in their production. A photograph depicting a Gothic revival key cabinet, number 74, and table, number 73, with mortise and tenon joinery in the legs, illustrates Kimbel and Cabus's early efforts in the modern Gothic style. And then we move along to 3 sequentially numbered desks, number 380, 381, and 382. So we've moved from 4 to the 70s to the 300s. And here we're looking at 3 presumably concurrently produced drop front desks, offering 3 completely different versions of a modern Gothic look. This desk, number 380, epitomizing something of a Swiss chalet in its form, with paired stags and even carved squirrels featured on the lower doors. The center desk having something of a fortress-like effect with these little finials that pierce through the slanting at the top, and it's been inset with tiles. We'll see those in just a moment. And then the desk on the far side of the screen has this sort of wonderful quatrefoil at the center of the drop front, surrounded by scrolling foliage and tendrils, and then these 3-dimensional owl finials. And here we see the 3 desks. We were able to borrow 3 versions a version of each desk, but for the exhibition, and I think you can see the glowing turquoise tiles on that center object. So the album documents Kimbel and Cabus's striking creativity and their skill at presenting customers with a wide range of aesthetic choices. And these photographs help us to identify some of the defining characteristics of the firm's work. So what are these defining characteristics? What defines Kimbel and Cabus objects? First of all, Kimbel and Cabus's designs are idiosyncratic. They're unmistakable among firms working in the modern Gothic style. They produced a wide array of striking and assertive forms, seen here, decorated with rich assemblages of ornament in a range of media. The case pieces are architectonic. They have the presence of small buildings, complete with gables, balustrades, arched openings and doors seen here on the arresting drop front desk from the Brooklyn Museum's collection, this magnificent étagère from a private collection. For furniture making, Kimbel and Cabus typically used ash, ebonized cherry, maple, oak, tulip poplar, and walnut, as well as rosewood for some of their early work. And then, if we zoom into some details, these forms display alternating, projecting, and recessed surfaces and components. So we have carved lion's masks, we have owl finials, we have little tiny grotesques. And all of this is combined with galleries of turned spindles, cabinet doors and drawers and knee holes that create a visually engaging interplay of light and shadow across the surface of the furniture forms. We also see crisply carved and incised surface decoration that complements the horizontal and vertical lines of the piece, complements the structure of the piece. Bands of geometric ornament include, and I draw your attention to these sort of details of the Brooklyn Museum desk, but we see zigzags and stylized sprigs and alternating individual motifs such as diamonds or X's and O's. We can pick out some of those elements here. There's also a kind of recurring theme of tightly coiled foliage with projecting spear-form tips, shields, seen here in the center of the drop front desk, armorial trophies, and carved concentric geometric shapes. All of this is the Kimbel and Cabus sort of vocabulary, the lexicon that you would see if you start looking at pieces again and again, as we did. Ceramic tiles from Britain and France, printed paper panels, and less frequently hand-painted figural or marquetry panels further enrich many of the objects, the case pieces. So on the left, we're looking at a detail of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston's desk, which was in that exhibition gallery shot. And here we see it inset with British tiles that are Minton's designs. We see two tiles at the top on the left and the right from John Moyer Smith's Shakespeare series. The central tile is from C.O. Murray's Spirits of the Flower series. And on the right, we see a detail of the Baltimore Museum of Art's very high style cabinet, in this case inset with these less frequently seen hand-painted panels. So some medieval huntsmen on gold on the bottom of the cabinet, and at the top we see two sprites flanking a brazier. Kimbel and Cabus may have purchased these tiles from any number of suppliers in New York City. For instance, Thomas Aspinwall in Lower Manhattan offered Minton's picture tiles for sale. In their most ornate designs, the firm incorporated, those hand-painted tiles that I was just describing to you. Printed paper panels, roundels, and borders of geometric motifs seen on a hanging wall cabinet and a revolving book stand were a cost-effective means of decorating small forms with fashionable motifs. So in this case, the printed paper panels of the medieval-style musicians that you see encircling the sides of the revolving book stand at the center, these are based on a Minton tile design. So this is a fashionable tile design made more affordable. A corner chair of arrestingly angular design and dramatic ebonized surface recalls the proto-modern work of British architect and designer Edward William Godwin. And so Kimbel and Cabus, they have a progressively designed chair with an ebonized surface that they've sort of amplified by including these printed paper panels of grotesques, little paired mice and little paired birds, which are interestingly seen here at the bottom, drawn from the British designer Christopher Dresser's grotesque motifs from Studies in Design. In another instance here, we're looking at a wall pocket. This is a relatively low-key object that you would hang on your wall and store pens, notes, gloves, things like that. But here, Kimbel and Cabus have taken this object and infused it with a fashionability. The top, we have the Minton-inspired medieval-style musician in a printed paper panel. And then here at the bottom, you see figures sitting in a vineyard involved in winemaking and grape harvesting. This looks kind of like an innocent little scene and maybe not very important, but what's fascinating about this actually is that this is inspired by murals that were painted in a castle in Germany, the Villa Kahn. These are Gisbert Münster's murals. And the Villa Kahn was designed by Edwin Oppler, the German designer that Medill mentioned a few moments ago. And Oppler printed the murals in Die Kunst im Gewerbe. So we see here, I'm not sure that the consumer necessarily would have known the backstory behind this imagery, but that this is a complete hybrid of fashionable English and German design motifs. Kimbel and Cabus employed striking metal hardware hinges and drawer pulls and escutcheons on their furniture forms that were produced by various makers and were most likely obtained from New York City purveyors, such as C.A. Stock. So here we see one of 3 images of C.A. Stock's inventory on the left, and a corresponding hinge, I think you can make the connection there, on the right on the Metropolitan Museum of Art's key cabinet. The hardware was made from brass and from nickel-plated brass with differing finishes, and the firm's hardware choices ranged from complex cast examples with very detailed ornament to more simple stamped forms with bold outlines, as you see here. At the peak of their public recognition and success, Kimbel and Cabus distinguished themselves by being incredibly versatile and offering an almost limitless range of aesthetic choices at different price points. And now Medill and I will sit together and speak informally and look closely at a few Kimbel and Cabus objects together and share some of the insights we've gleaned about the firm's clients.
While you're turning on, I'll start by saying the points we've been making about the sort of infinite play and variety that they would engage in is beautifully illustrated by these 2 étagères, in that you take the same form, but you use different hardware, you use different sorts of tiles, you have either the light wood finish or you have an ebonized finish incised in gold. And in this way, you really sort of encapsulate the way in which Kimbel and Cabus worked and thought and iterated.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is on the left, you have a version, the brown version. This is a walnut example that's inset with British tiles with a golden ground and these wonderful swallows. But what's fascinating about this object, if you could see it in person, you'd get a sense of this, is the incised decoration has been embellished with polychromy. So red, blue, and gold paint has been used to illuminate the incised carving. So it have a completely different effect. And the metal hardware hinges in this case are nickel-plated brass. So we have a silvered effect.
I think we've covered it. But when Barbara was talking about this lexicon of all of these different motifs, you'll find them in furniture, but they're scaled up or they're twisted. There's sort of infinite variety, and this gives us a little bit of an example of that.
A sample. If we move on to a different form, this is a library table that Kimbel and Cabus designed, and we can see right away that they were very much looking to Edwin Oppler's design for a library table, which he again printed in Die Kunst im Gewerbe. And the library table, Oppler's design, is based on a medieval table design. But what's kind of neat here is to see not only did Kimbel and Cabus adjust the placement of the stretchers, they moved them down so that you can see that central ornament, but also Oppler's carving, these sort of elaborate carved ends of the table, Kimbel and Cabus have made a very sort of price-conscious choice there and changed this to a printed paper panel.
And while we're looking at the Oppler design, and we keep sort of harping on these German sources, these really were big aha moments for us when we were doing the research, because traditionally the understanding had been Kimbel and Cabus took British modern Gothic design and brought it to an American audience. And it was in these comparisons we started to realize something that seems self-evident. Kimbel grew up in Germany, was trained in Germany, but until we sort of connected the dots and realized how readily accessible these designs were, not just to Kimbel from his time in Germany, but these publications were available to American audiences, that there is this very interesting hybrid German and English design going on. So this table is a perfect example of that. And again, we come back to Opler's chair design and see the way in which that leg design informs a dining chair that's in the Brooklyn Museum's collection. And it is another example of the fact that Kimbel and Cabus are not copying these designs. They're taking these ideas, and they love that leg design and using it in a variety of different ways.
And so how exciting was it when we were thinking this through? We were fortunate to borrow an example of this very proto-modern sofa that you see in the original period image on the upper left and magnificently reupholstered for the exhibition by the lender in the installation shot at the bottom, and according to the original Kimbel and Cabus scheme. But what is going on here? How did Kimbel and Cabus come up with that kind of crazy abstracted arm? And then we realized by playing with the Opler design and turning it upside down, that's exactly what they did. They inverted the design and created just a very forward-looking form for 1876. Aha, so here we are. So this is the part where we talk about the clients and the commissions. And when we began the project, really, Kimbel and Cabus have always been best known for their two major public commissions. For the interior of the Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church, located nearby on 55th Street, they designed the wood interior woodwork, the pews, the organ loft, etc. This is completed around 1875. And then, of course, the very important Company K room right here in the 7th Regiment Armory, which we'll hear about more in a moment. But what was very exciting for Medill and for me in our research was to look deeply into newspapers and journals and period photographs and design drawings and try to deduce as much as we could about the clientele. So here, for example, is a period image of the drawing room of William T. Hammond's house here in Manhattan. Mr. Hammond was a military physician and a professor, had a relationship with correspondence with Andrew D. White of Cornell, and Hammond's house was featured in Artistic Houses, which was a major publication in the early 1880s that featured the homes of the rich and famous, basically.
Yeah, and in this case, you're getting a sense that there are individual examples of Kimbel and Cabus furniture intermingled with all kinds of other things, imported goods, furniture, and decorations made by other firms. But you're getting a sense of how it would have been used and also who some of the clients were. And although Artistic Houses had been there until we started playing that sort of Where is Waldo game of trying to identify where we found Kimbel and Cabus furniture, this was not a client who anyone had associated with Kimbel and Cabus.
And that makes me want to do the Where's Waldo. I'm sorry, I didn't. So if we're looking on the lower left, there is a tete-a-tete, a little sofa that is Kimbel and Cabus. To the right of the little sofa is an armchair that you can see, and then in the background near the arching doorway is a side chair, Kimbel and Cabus. So we, in that spirit, move on to Glenview, which is John Bon Trevor's home in Yonkers. We move out to the suburbs, and John Bon Trevor is a Manhattan stockbroker, and he built Glenview with all modern conveniences and the latest styles around 1875, 1876. This is now the Hudson River Museum. And what's fascinating is if we look into a couple of these wonderful photographs, in this case of the parlor, we again see Kimbel and Cabus armchair in the center foreground, a recognizable side chair in the window in the background. And here we're in the sitting room looking into what was called the Ebonized Library, and the red arrows are indicating partial views of 3 known Kimbel and Cabus forms that we can identify in those period images. So how interesting for us here to be able to see, again, Kimbel and Cabus is not just being patronized by people in Manhattan. They are appealing to people in their suburban settings as well.
Exactly, and the progressive nature of their designs, it seems to make sense that you've got professors, but you also have stockbrokers and a whole sort of range. So we're starting to get a sense of the picture when they say price points for all. There really is quite a broad array of clientele who are patronizing Kimbel and Cabus. And here we're going back to New York City, but this is a really interesting instance where Kimbel and Cabus, it's not just a couple of pieces of furniture, this is an entire interior scheme that we can credit to them. This, as the caption shows, is the library of William de Forest, and he was a silk merchant and a real estate speculator, and this is his Manhattan home pictured in an 1879 art journal. We wouldn't have known that it was Kimbel and Cabus sort of writ large were it not for the design on the other side of the screen, which is survived in a group of designs that descended in Kimbel's family and live in a library in Berlin. And so you can see that the entire wall elevation for this house had been designed by them, and wonderfully the accompanying text with the article describes the colors of the room. So it talks about peacock green ceramic tiles and blue upholstery, and the furniture, they say, is light wood, so sort of some of that lighter furniture that we've shown you. You can get a sense of what this entire interior looked like, and a sense that when they say they're cabinet makers and decorators, this is the whole sort of range of what they're producing. And here we have the only known color image of a Kimbel and Cabus interior. I think it's fair to say one of our most exciting discoveries in working on this exhibition. And this depicts the Fifth Avenue home of the Kernishans. And James Kernishans was the descendant of a Louisiana sugar baron, and his wife was Catherine Lorillard, the heiress to the Lorillard tobacco fortune. So when we're talking about the range of their clientele, these are the kinds of clients that traditionally furniture historians had sort of said that's not the kind of client that would have been buying Kimbel and Cabus. But in fact, we see this entire room is outfitted with Kimbel and Cabus. You can see the woodwork has very characteristic Kimbel and Cabus details, and the cabinet to the right of the fireplace is really fabulous document of that polychromy that we were talking about, because for us, we can see little bits of red or blue or green surviving in incised elements, but there you can get a sense of what it looked like, and you also get a sense of a color scheme very much like the De Forest room, in that the sort of peacock greens and blues and reds. Now the painting, which dates to 1880, doesn't tell us whose home it is or who designed the furniture. We can identify the furniture, but then next slide will.
So this was the fortunate discovery that allowed us to make the connection to the Kernishan name. So this is an image from an art journal article in 1879, a different view of the same room. And I think you can see here, again, as with the painting moments ago, the chairs were the giveaway for the Kimbel and Cabus connection. And here I think you can see this is not a chair. Wouldn't it be nice if this was a chair from the Kernishan residence? But that is the form that we're seeing depicted. But this enabled us to pin the identity on the on the family.
And interestingly, this article that was showing the sort of finest interiors of New York describes both the DeForest interior and the Kernishan interior as sort of the most important and interesting interiors of the day.
So it's fitting, I think, to conclude with a few brief remarks about the Company K room. So I'm going to return to the podium for that. The Kimbel and Cabus commission for the Company K room was an important commission for them. It was completed in 1880, and it placed the firm at the forefront of New York furniture manufacturing and interior decorating companies. As some of you may know, the 7th Regiment Armory was the first militia to defend Washington, D.C. at the outbreak of the Civil War. And after the war, the regiment commissioned architect and regiment member Charles W. Clinton to design and construct a new privately funded armory. The armory resembled a fortified Italian palazzo, seen here on the left, and originally featured a central tower. And to raise funds for decorating the interior, members held a grand fair in 1879, and the regiment's companies competed in what was described as a tournament of taste, creating display booths of Byzantine, Chinese, Egyptian, Moorish, Persian, Queen Anne, and Venetian inspiration, among other themes. The fair was an astounding success. Each company received allotments from the proceeds and then strove to outdo one another in decorating the private rooms. The companies employed an illustrious array of cabinet making and decorating firms, including Herter Brothers, Potier and Stymus, and Louis C. Tiffany's associated artists, designers of this very room. The Company K room, which was designed by company member Sidney Stratton of New York's premier architectural firm of McKim, Mead & White, was awarded to Kimbel and Cabus. And as seen on the right, and as you will see in person if you join us, in contrast to the Renaissance revival style that predominated elsewhere in the building, Stratton's design, which was executed in oak and mahogany, was in the Queen Anne style, another fashionable mode of the 1870s. The Queen Anne style was characterized by an eclectic combination of English Baroque architectural elements, as we'll see upstairs. And the company members' wood-paneled lockers surrounded the sides of the rooms. They lined the walls of the rooms, and the frieze above depicted wreath-enclosed K motifs and pateray that echoed the carved woodwork below. A wonderful quote from the New York Times kind of says it all. A critic remarked that the room would differ from the others in that, quote, it will operate somewhat as a relief in its comparative simplicity and quaintness to the elaborate richness of the other styles. It's a great quote. Thank you, Kirsten, for sharing that. Finally, the Company K room was one of the rooms that was featured in a May 1885 Decorator and Furnisher article on the new armory. And the artist George Gibson created the illustration, which I show you on the left. And down in the lower right, you can see Gibson's distinctive signature. How interesting to learn of an article about Gibson's studio published in the same journal later that year. And if we look closely into the image, one of the images in the article, but of Gibson's studio, follow the red arrow, and you'll see a Kimbel and Cabus chair in the background. So fascinating insight, but it's also interesting to realize that Gibson was the illustrator of the DeForest and Kernishan interiors that we showed you a few moments ago that were published earlier in this same journal, and offers evidence of his long-term familiarity with and apparent appreciation of Kimbel and Cabus's work. The Company K room is a testament to Kimbel and Cabus's adaptability to working in a range of styles with a limitless creative versatility. And it's this versatility that sustained their successful 20-year partnership. For those of you who are interested and have the time, we take Kirsten's invitation to travel upstairs to see the Company K room in person. Thank you very much.